We have all heard of the Kamikaze, the seemingly fanatical Japanese pilots who hurled their aircraft into Allied ships, determined to take as many enemy lives as possible. Yet the truth behind these attacks is far more complex, darker, and immeasurably more tragic than it first appears. Today, we uncover what it was truly like to serve as a kamikaze pilot and why this desperate tactic emerged in the final stages of the war. As World War II approached its end, Japan faced an increasingly hopeless situation. Its air force had been shattered, both in machines and in men, while the Allies possessed superior aircraft, better training, and overwhelming numbers. Driven to the brink, Japan's military formed what they called special attack units, designed for missions of last resort. And what made these missions special? Only one thing: they were intended to end in death. Although the kamikaze became the most infamous of these forces, they were not alone. The state encouraged young men to volunteer for these fatal operations, presenting them as the last remaining path to victory. A way to inflict maximum destruction with minimal means, suicide torpedoes known as kaiten, explosive-laden crash boats, and tiny one-man submarines were all created with the same grim purpose. A single soldier was to destroy an entire Allied vessel at the cost of his own life. The aircraft used for kamikaze strikes reflected this desperation. Some were little more than wooden gliders packed with explosives in the nose, crude, simple, and meant for one use only. One such model, the Oka, was carried beneath a larger aircraft and released at the right moment, sending the pilot hurtling toward his target in a steep, uncontrolled descent. Allied crews nicknamed these machines idiot bombs because they were slow, unstable, and often destroyed long before reaching their mark. As Japan's situation worsened, even outdated planes were stripped of radios and weapons, then filled with explosives and fuel, transforming them into crude but deadly missiles, launched by men who knew they would not return. These weapons saw their most significant use during the Battle of Okinawa, where more than 30 Allied ships were sunk and roughly 3,000 soldiers lost their lives to such attacks. But to understand the scale of this tragedy, we must look at the pilots themselves. Although a few kamikaze aviators were seasoned flyers, by 1945, Japan had entirely abandoned advanced flight training. The missions no longer required expertise, only obedience and a willingness to die. In truth, most kamikaze pilots were barely adults, often only 17 or 18 years old. Many were students, children drawn into a war they struggled to comprehend, convinced that even in death their name might endure. One American sailor later recalled a kamikaze crashing into his ship. The bomb failed to explode, the fire was contained, and the pilot survived furious crewmen prepared to kill him, until they discovered he was just 13 years old. A boy who had volunteered out of fear that refusal might bring punishment upon his family. Beyond learning how to guide their planes into enemy vessels, pilots were trained to suppress the terror of dying so violently, promised an honorable end akin to the ancient samurai. Officially, participation in these missions was voluntary, with questionnaires and forms to express one's willingness. But in practice, the system allowed little freedom. Coercion was subtle yet constant, and those who hesitated faced sharp condemnation from commanders, comrades, and society itself. Yet this does not mean all refused. Many young men, raised under the strict ideals of the Bushido Code, believed sincerely that no greater honor existed than death in service to the emperor. From the outside, the Japanese soldier often appeared fearless, unwavering, and ready to die. But beneath the surface, the reality was far more human and far more heartbreaking. These were ordinary people with families, hopes, and quiet lives, not individuals born yearning to perish in flame and shattered metal. Allied servicemen who encountered kamikaze pilots and survived often recalled the same thing. When these young men set off with nearly 800 kilograms of explosives, there was no glory in their eyes, no triumph, only fear and thoughts of loved ones left behind. They worried for parents who depended on their wages and for families who would now face the war without them. And yes, Some kamikaze pilots did survive, but returning alive was not a blessing. It carried its own burden, its own peril, a fate we will explore shortly. For now, it is enough to know that these young men faced almost certain death. Some embraced it, some dreaded it, and others accepted the mission simply because they knew that if they refused, their friend would go in their place. There was no official ritual before a kamikaze mission. That final stretch of time was left entirely to the pilot. Some prepared quietly in their own way. Others were even granted a few days of leave to visit their families for the last time. Imagine that, walking into your home knowing that this farewell would be the final memory your loved ones carried of you. Photographs taken before these missions show pilots gathered with their comrades, smiling, encouraging one another. Yet even through the lens, the tension is unmistakable. Almost all wrote final letters to their families and left behind a keepsake. One young pilot apologized to his parents for not being the best son, promising he would die with a smile and wait for them on the other side. On the day of the mission, every thought was directed toward the distant enemy ship. Pilots were instructed to send one final, uninterrupted Morse code signal during their approach. Those monitoring the radios knew that if the steady tone abruptly vanished into silence, the mission had reached its intended end. After the war, during the Allied occupation of Japan, kamikaze pilots were broadly dismissed as fanatical madmen. This harsh portrayal shattered the lives of the few who survived. They sought only to rebuild, to work, to support their families, yet their reputations had been destroyed. And the psychological toll of their experiences complicated everything further. Many survivors were branded as cowards, even when they lived only because their aircraft malfunctioned or crashed into the sea before reaching the target. Some returned home only to face rejection from their own families for failing to die properly. Captain Okamura, the architect of the kamikaze strategy, believed this tactic would turn the tide of the war. Unable to bear the weight of the nearly 4,000 young men lost to these missions, he ultimately took his own life. Though the kamikaze did not bring victory to Japan, certain strikes were undeniably devastating. 3 Casablanca-class escort carriers were among the vessels destroyed, and in total, roughly 50 Allied ships were sunk. Their threat forced the Allies to strengthen anti-aircraft defenses and refine radar detection to respond more rapidly to incoming attacks. Feared by those who faced them, kamikaze pilots were later viewed differently as Japan reshaped its post-war narrative in the 1970s and 1980s. They were once again described as heroes, ordinary soldiers who carried out their grim duty like countless others across the world's battlefields, and whose missions, however tragic, reflected the brutal realities of war rather than madness or disgrace. Because beneath every uniform and every final dive toward an enemy ship stood an ordinary human being. Many were unbearably young, with families, fears, and fragile hopes. Not men who chose such a fate, but victims of a vast and terrible war that consumed them.